Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today I want to give you guys a video introducing the general basic and some intermediate mechanics of the Bazaar. So the Bazaar is probably out in open beta by the time you're watching this video. It is a game you can play for free. I've been playing the Bazaar like crazy. I participated in Family and Friends. I am not affiliated with the company or anything like that. I just really love the game. I think it is one of the most fun games I have ever played, and I really like that they're taking risks and they're updating the game on a very regular basis. With that in mind, I actually made this video a couple of months ago, or some version of it, but fast forward a couple of months, fast forward like 10 patches that actually tackled many different builds, many different system changes, upgrades to mechanics, new ways that mechanics can actually work. We're at a state where it's probably time to make this video again. So pay attention, because this is a game you're not going to want to miss. So we're going to kickstart with getting into the game itself. So you click play. You will have the option originally to just play Vanessa. Vanessa is a free hero. You can play normal or ranked. If you play normal, it's free. If you play ranked, you need a ticket. If you don't have a ticket, it will take some of these gems. I think you can buy some of these gems. You're also rewarded some of them from the supporter pack, and they generally have like cosmetic stuff. That's basically how they make money. Now, if you just want to have fun, just play normal, it's fine. And if you do want to kind of see how well you can do, ranked will earn you chests and will also earn you more of these things where you can get further cosmetics and you get currency to unlock the other heroes. Now, Vanessa has traditionally been one of the strongest heroes, if not the strongest heroes so far up until this point, because she's just like extremely good at just everything offense. And with all games, it pays to be proactive in your strategy rather than reactive. If you play reactive, you're typically just across the board going to be more vulnerable to counters. Pig might be a hero you'd like to unlock. Pig plays a lot more of the economy game. He has properties, he has some cool skills, he has some really interesting synergy, and he is kind of like the mogul, the merchant of the game. And Dooley starts with unique cores that only Dooley has access to, and it creates a case where each different core promotes a different strategy, at least for a while in each run. So Dooley is not like one character. Dooley is kind of like, you know, six to 10 characters in one, because there's just so much stuff that you can do, and you kind of need to take in and master each different core if you're going to play Dooley a lot. Now we're just going to get started and do a run with Vanessa real quick so you guys can kind of see how the game is played out. Now, when a game begins, they have actually changed the start of the game and what options you start with many times in the closed beta already, and news is that they're going to be continuously looking and trying to make this a more interesting experience. So basically, I just want to outline the goals. The game of Bazaar starts. Your character is level 1. You have 5 income, which is the amount of gold you get at the end of each day. Each day has 6 hours on it. So when the day starts, then you have hour 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and on the last hour is when you have a PvP encounter. You play someone's ghost, so it's asynchronous PvP, and in the other encounters are many random things that can happen, but there is a rhythm to the madness that I will explain here shortly. You use your income to get the initial amount of gold, and you basically buy and sell things to have the best odds that you can in PvP. When you start a run, you will have a total prestige of 20. Your reputation is flawless. You have never taken a hit, but you might start losing, and your prestige will go down if you lose. A run is over if your prestige hits 0, but the first time your prestige hits 0, you go to a resurrection event where you get a choice of 3 massive boosts. Usually you want to go the enchantment one. And you also go back to 1 prestige. The res event can only happen one single time. So what does that mean? When you lose, you lose prestige based on the day. So if on this first day we lose the PvP encounter, we'll go from prestige 20 -1, prestige 19. Now sometimes you might go to like a day 15. Can be that long to have a run in the Bazaar. So if you lose on day 15, you'll lose 15 prestige. On day 15, you probably won't have 15 prestige. So probably you'll have like 1 or 2 maybe, or maybe you've already experienced your res event. If you already had your res event and you lose, you're just going to lose your run and it's over. But if you have like 2 prestige and you lose on day 15 -15, you're not dead if you haven't had the res event. You basically have the res event and you're set back to 1. You basically get your second chance. A game is won if you collect victories up to 10. So going to 10 victories just ends your run and you are basically successful. It's possible to achieve this on day 10 if you win every single encounter. And the amount of days kind of does actually make a pretty big impact on the builds that you can and should play in order to have a chance at winning. Now take all that back. Let's start a run. Your journey begins here. The options that you'll be given, again, I'm sure they'll constantly change, but the goal that you have is to win the very next day. In the early parts of the game, you're not really worried about what build you're going to play later. What you're really worried about is, what can I do to increase my odds of winning this day's PvP fight? So you can see that in some cases you're offered items, in some cases you're offered skills. Strategy aside, let's just go with this one because I can highlight what skills do. So I get 1 small gold tier item, 1 silver tier skill. So we have Vanessa's Amulet. Your items have 30% crit chance. Sure, why not? And we get your weapons. Your non-weapons have 10% crit chance. That's pretty cool. So this goes here, which is where your skills go. These are kind of like passive effects. You can never lose any of these. So you just keep accumulating more and more. There's no cap to them, even though it looks like there's a cap of 6. It'll just keep increasing that underlay where your skills are. You can get as many skills as you want. Your items are basically restricted to this play area, and the play area will increase up until level 4. So your first goal is to try to get to level 4 as fast as possible. Your stash always has 10 slots in it. Now, every single hour you're offered new type of events. You cannot have an event that is the exact same on the same day. So if I see Curio here, I cannot see Curio again on day 1, but on day 2, I can maybe see Curio again. Now, seeing as I have no active items, I'm probably going to go to Curio because he sells items. He is a merchant. Even though we only have 5 gold, it might be enough. You're always offered 3 choices. One of them is usually a vendor. One of them is usually an event. Now, these events have some pretty changing rewards. I encourage you guys to check them out and see what kind of cool stuff you can find. And one of the events is typically get something for free. Sometimes it's an item. Sometimes it's like a temporary buff for the next fight that you'll experience, which can be a very good idea even. Now, this option is one you might want to consider versus this one if you have no gold whatsoever or your build is more or less set. However, my build is not set at all, so we're going to go to the vendor. Now, the vendors are typically going to have 3 items, but Curio, which sells bronze tier and neutral items, typically sells junk, basically is what he's called, a junk dealer, right? So he will actually have a full screen of items. This is a unique property of this vendor. The vendors are all unique. They're all themed. You can kind of like click on the portrait and have them talk to you. They're really cool. It's a really polished game in that regard. You can also reroll. Every vendor has the option to reroll, but the shop reroll is not created equal. Different vendors have different costs for the reroll. The reason they have different costs is because an item that you see on the first screen of a vendor cannot show up on the second screen of that vendor encounter. And some vendors have highly specific things that they sell, and this is really important because one vendor might have like an item category that there's only like 10 items. So if he has 3 in the first screen, it's 3 of 10. But if you click the reroll, because you can't have those 3 again, it's effectively 3 of 7. So if you're looking for a specific item that that vendor has a tight restriction on, the reroll option might be extremely powerful. Early on, because you don't have much gold, it's a good idea to not reroll, but sometimes you'll have to because, well, you have to get something on your side of the board for it to work. Early on, I really like going with poison because it stacks up and does pretty good damage over time. I'll explain items a little bit later in the video, but this is not too bad. Everything with a cooldown that does non-control based stuff can crit, so it has 40% chance to crit because it is an item from the Vanessa amulet and it is a non-weapon from this. So this means that it'll poison for 1 and 40% of the time it'll poison for 2. Sometimes items will have more than one effect, so they'll actually crit everything at once or nothing at once. The crit is rolled on the entire activation of the item if it has multiple abilities. I'm just going to pick up another item, so this seems like a pretty good idea. Some items have this effect. When you sell this, it actually buffs a weapon. This is not a very good weapon, but it's going to make me slightly stronger on the first day encounter. And, well, if I find a weapon that's a little bit better later, I can actually improve it by selling the magnifying glass. So I'm going to buy that. I can't afford anything else. It's also a good time to explain item tiers. So you can see that the border of all of these is bronze. Okay, and we can see that the border for this skill is silver. That's the silver tier. So the bronze goes to silver, and the silver goes to gold, and the gold goes to diamond. So there's effectively 4 tiers for all items and skills. And the chance that you see them on your vendors and on the rewards of some of the events has to do with the day that it is. On day 1, you can only find bronze items and bronze skills on your vendors. On day 2, you can begin to find items that are silver. This is significant because not all items and skills start at bronze. While the trained spider starts at bronze, some items, now not this one, but some items will start at gold, for instance, which means that you won't be able to find the item at all until you actually are on a high enough day for gold items to show up. For silver, it's day 2. For gold, it's day 5. And for diamond, they recently changed it. I believe it's day 8. It used to be day 9. Once you're done with the vendor, in my case, I am completely broke. It's time to leave the encounter. Now, a day is structured in the following way. We're going to have 2 kind of like merchant or event style options, and then we're going to have a monster fight, and then we're going to have 2 more merchant style options or event options, and then we're going to have the PvP fight. So every day is going to be at least 2 fights, one against a PvE monster, one against a PvP player's ghost, effectively. I'll explain that in a moment. And in between those, 2 chances to make your build slightly stronger. So these monsters here are the options that I am given. On the first day, they are generally very, very easy. On the later days, you will see that the monster on the right is going to be more rewarding in both gold and experience, but it will be more difficult. It is extremely important to not lose to these monsters, because if you lose experience, you are going to fall behind in levels and have a really bad time on the rest of your run. So if you're a new player, I recommend typically not going for the hardest monster on a given encounter if you have a choice, unless you feel you are ridiculously strong. Once your mastery of the game grows, you should feel more confident to maybe challenge them. On day 1, all of the monsters can be beaten with very minimal builds, or in some cases, no build at all. So for example, I can take away all of my items and I'll still beat the Kyber drone, the Fang Inglet, or the Pyro. Actually, if I use one bad item, the Kyber drone might win because he has damage scaling based on slow. But I can show you guys kind of how this works. So let's go for the Kyber drone. We have absolutely no items, and he has items. So why are we going to win? Well, there is a pretty vast HP difference, and 30 seconds into combat, we're going to experience the Sandstorm, which is effectively the fatigue mechanic where both the player and your opponent take like significant and ramping damage over time. When you beat a monster, you will get the reward stated and one item or skill that it possesses. So we'll have 20% chance to obtain his skill, 20% chance for the wing, 20% for the stinger, 20% for the longjun, and 20% for the eagle talisman. So you can see the fatigue damage. The sandstorm hit me at 6 health and him at 9. Now in this case, this monster has no critical chance on any of his items, so I know from experience that I will win with no items whatsoever. But if I had a really bad item, he could potentially slow when he uses the stinger, and when you slow, weapons gains damage, and because I ended at 6 health, if I had one really crappy item, he could actually beat me. There's a few tricks like that that are really cool, and you'll learn as you play the game. Now, I beat him, so I got one of his items. If you have an item of a different tier, so let's say I had a long john, like this item, but I had it at silver, it would effectively be disabled from the monster. You cannot get a duplicate item. Now, if I had a bronze long john and he dropped this thing, I could get that as a drop, and it would upgrade into a silver tier. So that's how that works. So we'll pick that up. This is a pretty cool item, and it actually does help me fill my board a little bit better. Don't be fooled by the higher number on values. You might think, hey, 40 damage, 5 damage. Well, that's pretty good. Well, yes, this one kind of sucks, but this one does 1 DPS. It does 5 damage every 5, and this does 4 DPS, where it does 40 damage every 10. So, you know, they're still fairly comparable. As you keep going, you have to always weigh in how much gold you might have to spend. A vendor might be a good idea, but I really don't think I'll afford much of anything, so we can just click on an event. An event will give you typically some options here. The options for the events are set, but there are some Easter eggs that you'll find. We'll get a random neutral item, why not? We'll get another event here, and one of those options, actually, I can highlight here on the tiny furry monster. This one here, if you have a friend, gain 1 experience. And I do have a friend, as you can see from the tag above this item's name. If I didn't have a friend or food or a toy, this option would not show up, and it would be only these two. Not all events have Easter eggs, but most of them do, and often their Easter egg kind of like reward is a fairly powerful one. You don't always want to click it, but often you do. In this case, I am going to click the experience because of how important experience is early in a run. Now, the experience that you have is down here. It takes 8 experience to level each time. So we'll go from 1 to 2. When you level, you get a flat amount of HP based on that level, which increases with higher levels, and you will get kind of like a reward screen for leveling that again has set but some RNG options for each level specifically. So let's get the experience here. And you can see the clock moves. We are now in the final hour until the next day. We are going up against an opponent here, so this is actually a player's board also on the same day that I am playing. And typically it's a good idea to be as strong as possible, but, you know, in my case, I feel like 5 damage isn't that much damage here. It'll be only 0.5 DPS, so I'm hoping that doesn't make the difference. I'm going to try to save those for perhaps a better weapon that I might get later. We have the Long John, which doesn't do that much DPS. We have the Spider that doesn't do that much DPS, but we got some crit on them, so hopefully the encounter will work out. Now the PvP encounter, you do not gain any kind of items or anything like that. You just want to win as well as you can. And you can kind of see we're playing Dooley. Dooley's got an armored core, which has in-combat scaling. My chance of winning here is absolutely 0. But sometimes that's how it is. As the game rolls out in the higher number of days, you will experience much more agency in order to play your build. In some cases, in the early game, you might just not have an opportunity to win. Sometimes that's how it works. In the Bazaar, you gotta roll with the punches. In the mid game, the agency starts to kick in. You often do have at least kind of like half a build, or at least some powerful synergies working out, and well, you can kind of go from there and go with an endgame build. So we leveled up because the bar filled. At level 2, you only get one option, but on every other level, you get multiple options. So we can get crit, we can get your leftmost point, these are skills, or when you win a fight against a player, gain 2 gold, or you can re-roll this shop. And again, when you re-roll, you cannot have these 3 options. In this case, why not? I just want to be as strong as possible for the day 2 encounter, so I will get a little bit of poison damage for my spider. Now, there's lots of different encounters, and they ramp up in craziness and impactfulness as you play the game. For that, I encourage you guys to check it out. In terms of the pacing of the game, around day 8 or 9, you're going to want to have a pretty good build, and with that, it's going to require a lot of experience, but you can fast forward that experience by, watching me stream. You can watch some of my other videos on this channel. We are also having our builds on Mobalytics. I'll include this site as well for you guys on this video. But whenever I have a YouTube video, you should check the description because I might have the build in Mobalytics as well, so you can see the written form. And if you go on Mobalytics, you can see some of the video examples linked, like this is a Pig Ice Club build. You can see some of the boards that have worked, and they have tooltips for the different items and skills that are often good to use. So it's a very, very important resource for that. Now, on to items. Now let's get into a little bit more of an item deep dive. So this is day 8. I have like a running build here, and you can kind of see a little bit of synergy, and I'll go over through some of the different item types. So the most basic item type is a weapon, and you can tell weapons apart because they have the damage in red. And this one does 24 damage over 5 seconds, so it's just pretty basic item. You can do damage with burning, so burning damage stacks up. Like when I use an adjacent, I do burning 2. If I'm just rapid firing adjacent, the burning will keep stacking up and up and up. Now burning damage accumulates, triggers twice per second. So if the opponent has 100 burn, they're going to be taking 200 damage per second. But every time that burn does damage, its burn stack is reduced by 1. So it has kind of like a cascading kind of mechanic where if you do enough burn damage to constantly increase the number of burn stacks, well, it is going to ramp up damage considerably. There is also poison. So poison is also a damage over time effect like burn, and it's denounced by the dark green thing there. Now this is a light green and a dark green. The dark green poison is similar to burn, but it is different in a very key way. It stacks up, but it does not deteriorate when it does damage. Poison damage, however, is dealt once per second. So if they have 100 stacks of poison and 100 stacks of burn at the same time, it will mean that they actually take twice as much burn damage. Now, burn damage is actually halved if they have any amount of shielding. This is an item with shielding. It has the kind of indicator with the yellow number here at the top. That is a shield, so this one shields 4 times this item's value, and shielding halves any amount of burn damage. So let's say you have 100 burn damage and you're about to take one of the damage instances, which happens every half second. If you have 1 shield and you're about to take 100 burn damage, you actually take 50. It doesn't matter how much shield you have. If you have any amount of shield, the burn damage is halved. And if you have any amount of shield, effectively the burn does the same as the poison with the same number of stacks. Now, poison damage actually bypasses shield completely. So if it is going to be an opponent with a heavy amount of shielding and not that much healing, poison damage will actually counter them far better than burn damage will. Burn actually won't do very well at all. There is also the light green value here, which is a heal. Now, heal can only heal you up to your maximum health amount, and because of that, shield is typically better. Shield is kind of like health on top of your health amount. Like if your opponent has a weapon that does 1,000 damage and you have 800 health, if you shield for over 200 before you get hit, you will survive the one shot, making shield typically a stronger mechanic than heal. This is typically balanced because the heal value on items is typically larger than the shield value on items because you can't really overheal. Now, heal does have the advantage that when you heal any amount, it is going to reduce a poison stack and a burn stack by 1. This is not a significant value in the later days, but in the very first few days and the very first few monster encounters, where sometimes there's a little bit of poison damage and a little bit of burn, some amount of healing can actually make a huge difference. Now, you do have these skills that interact with these items. You'll see that a lot of skills interact with item sizes. A small item is one that it's like this one, it takes up 1 slot. The medium item is twice as big as a small item, and the large item is 3 times as big as a small item. There are no smaller and there are no larger items. Now, the board here, this is kind of like the board that you play against your opponent. Typically speaking, this is the main thing that you are doing damage with. The stuff in your stash, however, it's still a high consideration on what you should keep. Sometimes you might want to have an item like I'm keeping the incendiary rounds. I might get some kind of skill that interacts with burn, and this is a really good activator for a burn trigger, so maybe I'll use it later. You can keep an item in your stash you might think you'll use later. There are some items that kind of gain value or have a constant effect, like the business card. So every 5 merchants I visit, it upgrades. That's why it's at diamond. And when I visit a merchant, this gains 3 value. So this is kind of ramping up my economy game. We also have things like globe, which are like start of day effects. Now, almost all of these work from your stash, even ones that generate items at the start of day. In this one, it's gained 200 max health. There's quite a few items that work this way, but of course, you do have a maximum 10 slots in your stash, so you have to still be wise about which ones you choose to keep. I also have the bootstraps, which allows me to constantly upgrade items, which is a really cool mechanic. Now, I mentioned that most items don't really help your board, but some of them do. It's just that they do so in a pretty minimal amount. But I can give you guys an example here with the loop. Your small items have +1 value. So if I use the rewards card on the board, it still has that passive effect, and because the toxic subscraper does a heal equal to 4 times the value of your items, you can sometimes have a combat effect from items in your stash, but typically you would ignore that. There is another source of healing here that I picked up earlier in the run. You see this 2 next to my health total. This is a regeneration. So regeneration is just like a passive heal per second. It is very good in the first couple of days, and then afterwards you typically ignore the mechanic altogether. When it comes to being like a hit with poison damage, let's say you are at 4 health and you're about to take 5 poison damage, but you have 2 regen, you actually won't die from that poison tick. Regen and poison kind of happen on the same stack, and I believe you can heal damage that would otherwise kill you, again, if it happens at the exact same instant and the heal is sufficiently large enough. And typically it doesn't really play a role because in the later stages of the game you have cooldown reduction mechanics, like my toxic subscraper is like a 3.8. They might have like a 3.9 or like a 5 second. It's really rare that these things match up with their timings, but it's possible. If it happens with a shield will not save you. So if you are about to take lethal damage and you shield in the exact same instance, you will actually die with shield on your character. Very minimal thing, but something to notice. Also, this is a toxic subscraper, so this is not an item that comes this way normally. Items can obtain enchants in very rare events and breakpoints. Right now you can get an enchant event at level 10, at level 19, and when you first die. Now, it can be very difficult to actually know what these enchants might do because they vary item to item, but they typically have an effect that converts the main property of the item into a different thing. So for the subscraper, it makes its poison 10% of the base healing. This item does not normally poison, but if you get a toxic version, you can do that. Now, if you do want to know what all the enchants do, it is a little bit of a nuisance, but if you want to know for absolute sure, I'll link the How Bazaar. This is just the site that I use. I'm not affiliated with it, so you can look up Subscraper under items and see all the different enchants it can get and what its effects are. Once you play for a while, you'll kind of figure this out, and a lot of the items will be repeat ones, and you'll kind of know what to look for. Let's get into a fight, and hopefully we can explain a few more mechanics. Maybe they have a few mechanics that don't exist on my side of the board. My board works by duplicating the value of this item from the balcony, and I value stack this item through a large number of ways. The deed has value equal to my highest value, and the subscraper heals relative to the value of all my items and poisons with 10% of that value. So we just beat him with poison damage. It was pretty easy. You can click recap to kind of see how this worked out. Oh, great. So we have a mechanic that I can also explain here. The opponent's board was using a bunch of weapons. Ammo weapons do quite a bit of damage. He has a reload mechanic because they run out of ammo. They don't work anymore. And he's using the haste mechanic to fire his double barrel faster. So the haste mechanic designated here, so I got used 8 times. Haste it for 3 seconds when you use the item to the right. So an item normally has the cooldown kind of displayed here. So this is a 2.7 second cooldown. The baseline is 3, and you can reduce it with a variety of effects in a permanent way or a temporary way. Now it basically takes, if you watch the fight again, you can see that the cooldown bar takes 2.7 seconds roughly to kind of fill up. When it reaches the top, the item goes off. Okay, it's pretty simple, more or less. And if you have a haste effect, this slider will actually charge twice the normal rate. So if something has a haste effect, it will effectively go off twice as often as it would otherwise. Now, the opposite to haste is slow, and if something is both hasted and slowed, effectively they nullify each other. Now, an item can go off a maximum of 1 times per second. So if we pretend that the fixer-upper had a 1.7 second cooldown and was always hasted, it wouldn't go off at half of 1.7. It wouldn't go off 0.85 seconds. It would go off every 1 second. So there is kind of like an item activation cap. And there is another mechanic that is somewhat rare, but exists on a very select few items. Charge, you will see like charge 1 or charge 2. Instead of the slider moving up, it'll just move the slider, the cooldown slider, ahead in time for that charge value. So if it's like let's say you have a different item charge the adjacent item 1 second. When it goes off, it'll just bump the cooldown 1 second. It won't bump it over its value, however. So if you have only a tiny amount left on the cooldown and it charges it 1 second, it'll only charge the remaining amount until the item is used. And the charge value does go around the 1 second activation cap from lower cooldowns and hasted effects. But an item has all items have kind of like an internal maximum activation rate of about 5 times per second. Now that gets pretty extreme. There is another form of crowd control here that you'll see because I have a skill. The first time I poison, freeze one item for 3 seconds. It landed on the butterfly swords, so it landed with a freeze. Frozen items do not charge and cannot activate. You can kind of see they're like visually frozen when that happens. and frozen items literally stop charging, but if you have those rare instances of other charge effects, they can be charged from other items while they're frozen, though they are not able to activate, so they'll kind of be stuck at the top of their activation. Freeze is extremely strong, haste is extremely strong, and you have to kind of put things in a bit of a perspective. While some builds are a bit more basic, like deal damage every few seconds, shield every few seconds, some builds will have a high amount of synergy. So when you increase the activation of all your items by ×2, like if you have haste on all your items, your build is not twice as good, because the synergy involved, it can be 3 times as good, it can be 4 times as good, it can be 10 times as good if you have a crazy synergistic build, and maybe you're ramping, increasing burn damage, and burn also has kind of like a ramping damage in its own mechanic. Now, slow is the opposite. If you slow all your opponent's items all of the time, they're not half as effective. Now, they might be if you have like no synergy, but they might be like 80% less effective if they have a high synergy build. So focusing on crowd control in addition to high throughput on your build can make quite a difference. Now, let's take the victory. When you win, you get another notch. 10 wins is what we're looking for. Overall, in the Bazaar, I think it really has grown on me as a game, because it's a game that you have so much variety in when you play. Now, there are cases where you kind of see a lot of the same builds and kind of like the meta, and you can kind of understand that from playing the game. You can kind of understand that, again, from checking out builds on Mobalytics or my streams or other streams or whatnot. But one thing that the developers have been pretty forward about is they want every run to kind of feel opportunistic. If you're reaching a point where you're just absolutely brute forcing one build, they want to design the game in a way where doing so will cause you to, on average, perform badly. They want an opportunistic game, playing on the fly in a roguelike, and really kind of thinking on your feet. That's what they're going for. Now, we have had many different patches and iterations of all these different mechanics in the closed beta period in the last few months. However, largely they were tackling system changes, mechanic changes, that type of stuff. I think balance in that period was overall secondary. So we did see a number of cases where builds were forcible. But I think if they stay true to their philosophy for the game, a game like Bazaar is one where you really just want to learn as much as possible about it and try to be creative in the way that you play. In the long term, if they succeed in that goal, I think it's going to be one of the best games that you can play, honestly. So I'm pretty excited now that they're launching it, and I'm excited to give you guys information and perhaps have you guys try the game as well. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time.